Welcome back to the MyLatinLife podcast. Since 2014, MyLatinLife has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Our guest today is a repeat guest, John Richardson, the counselor for U.S. persons abroad, the U.S. Citizenship renunciation expert, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. John, welcome back to the podcast.
Well, I think I'm a repeat guest.
Yeah, it's number 3, number 4.
Over the years.
Yeah, this episode might put you number 1 in terms of repeat guests, but you're one of the only people that actually reaches out to me and says, "Hey, let's do another one. Hey, let's do another one." And how can I say no? I mean, you charge $1,000 an hour for a consultation or something. So I mean, it's a
Well, these are good ways to get sort of general thoughts out there, sort of in the world and the retail market. Yeah, I think it's hard to think about renunciation. I think it differs so much, among age groups, among whatever citizenship people are left with, et cetera. And I saw your tweet, which was I think exploring, the reasonableness of renunciation, et cetera. So I thought, well, why don't we explore that in a podcast for the general public?
Yeah, because previous podcasts we've done were more about like the tax side of things and, covered expatriates versus whatever. So this one might be more about just, I don't know, I guess like the consequences of renunciation.
Sure.
So we kind of came up with the tagline, thinking about renunciation ? And then now we kind of go into all those probably common questions that everybody has when they're kind of weighing the pros and cons of this very important decision, right? So I guess maybe the first question that comes up for most people, or the first thought is it possible to get the U.S. citizenship back, 20 years from now or something?
Oh my God. It's amazing. You'd start with
take backsies.
Yeah, it's amazing you'd ask me that first. Seriously, because I'm actually working on I'm helping somebody try to reverse renunciation right now. Get U.S. citizenship back. So we'll see. I mean, the short answer is yes, it's possible. I wouldn't advise it as a plan of attack, though. This is not an easy thing to do. And I don't know, whether in the case I'm working on, we're going to be able to develop the facts, to clear the hurdle or not. But so theoretically, the answer is yes. Practically, I sure wouldn't count on it. So,
and what would that look like? What is the process
to get it back?
Yeah.
Well, when you get a certificate of loss of nationality on the back of it or something, it says, that these things can always be reviewed. They used to have a specific division in the State Department called the Board of Appellate Review to do this. They got rid of that a number of years ago. And now, you can basically ask them to review it, right? But it's got to be reviewed in the context of the law of renunciation. Or relinquishment generally, right, which is that it has to be voluntarily done with the intention to relinquish U.S. citizenship, right? So, a lot of these cases, first of all, these are very difficult cases to develop, right? Because when you renounce, you're signing all kinds of stuff saying you understand what you're doing and you intend to, relinquish citizenship. Plus, you're asked that, specifically, you have to take an oath of renunciation. So, essentially you're in the world of trying to argue that external circumstances in your life meant that you didn't really have the intention or whatever. And this is not easy, but, it is possible. So I think that what's important is that people proceed on the basis that if they renounce, it's forever. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't get U.S. citizenship back, right? Because, you can get a green card, go through the whole process again. I'd marry a U.S. citizen,
right,
etc.
That's
a lot of work.
Yeah. Okay, so you'd have to basically argue that you like renounced under duress almost or something like that.
Well, it's funny. I did not expect to be in this discussion with you today at all, but it's good because I spent most of Sunday going through about 100 decisions of the Board of Appellate Review. Trying to figure out what are the circumstances under which this could possibly be reversed, and so again, we're looking for factual circumstances that would cast the intention to renounce in doubt, right? Somehow or another. Um, one extreme, we have people, um, with very, very serious mental problems, right? Who, one could imagine reasonably did not know what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that the, State Department officer administering the ritual, so to speak, um, wasn't sufficiently probative, right, of what was going on. So, I mean, there's that. There are pretty strict rules that State Department employees have to follow to do this. So there's the issue of did they do what they were supposed to do?
Uh-huh.
Um,
Okay, so you make an argument. You
they're
say
professional.
I was under psychosis from magic mushrooms or whatever. And then what does it actually look like? Is it like a legal case? Are you like sort of suing the government, or
Oh
what
no,
does it
no,
actually
no.
look like?
It's not a adversarial Well, I mean, I think anything with the U.S. government is to some extent adversarial, right? But
It's a good line.
any government, okay, but it's not. No, I think it's actually a fairly collaborative inquiry into what was going on. But the problem is that, well, the State Department does carry the burden of proof, all right, on showing intention. Interestingly, they don't carry the burden of proof on voluntariness, but they do on intention. Um, and we'll have to see. I mean, the areas where it appears to me, okay, that you can make some headway are, somebody who's really young, parental influence, obviously. I mean, there are people with certain, well-recognized categories of mental disorders
Mm-hmm.
that would perhaps call into question their understanding of what they were doing.
Okay, so you'd have to sort of cast some doubt on the process or whatever. And then is it through DC or is it through the embassy?
No, it's through the State Department,
State Department. So
generally.
it's
Okay.
through the U.S., which is through the
Yeah.
U.S., right?
Yeah,
It's
that's
not the
right.
embassy
But they
consulate.
would involve, the local consulate or embassy that did this fairly early on,
Okay.
to get their record of what actually happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
Etc. Look, I'm not recommending this as a plan of attack.
Right.
Although I'm trying very hard for this person, I think it's clearly an uphill battle. Okay, clearly, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay, I mean, I have some categories of facts that I think are helpful, but it's a hard hurdle to clear.
Okay. So not impossible, but damn near impossible. This episode of the MyLatinLife podcast is brought to you in part by Crema Social. Crema Social is like TikTok for international dating. It's an app you can download right now on your phone, and 3 out of 4 people on Crema are single women. The app was founded in Colombia, so unsurprisingly, there are a lot of Latinas on the app, by the way. So how does it work? Crema Social is a social meal experience where you invite a hot girl for a lunch date via video call and food delivery. New concept, so you'll have to try it out for yourself, but this is probably the best way to meet Latinas before you visit the country. So if you're in Latin America or planning to visit Latin America, download Crema Social now and start getting dates right away. There will be a link in the description to download, or just search Crema Social on your favorite app store. Have fun, guys.
Not impossible, but very, very difficult to clear the hurdle. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, as you said, basically consider it as if it's for life.
Consider it as if it's for life. And to that, I would actually add, I mean, I don't want a bunch of doom and gloom here, right? But I would point out that, if you're not a citizen, you don't have the right to enter the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
For any reason. I mean, your ability or capacity to enter the United States depends on what country you're a citizen of.
Mm-hmm.
It also depends on, issues in your past. Do you have any kind of a criminal record, for example?
Mm-hmm.
And other things. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I think that this is going to affect large numbers of people, okay? I think everybody understands, and, you, of course, will be happy to hear this, even though you know it, that, Canadians or citizens of the Bahamas, are in a particularly good position
Mm-hmm.
After renunciation, because they can basically just enter the United States, right, with a passport.
Yeah, visa free.
Yeah, the next level down would be the visa waiver group, right?
The Esther group.
Yeah, the ESTA group. But, you don't have to change the immigration laws to change policies with respect to how they're administered, right? And we can see with this student visa stuff, that they're now requiring social media profiles and,
Mm-hmm.
And they be public, et cetera, that, this is not, I mean, I don't think that people from visa waiver countries are going to have any trouble getting a visa, to enter the United States, right? A clearance, an ESTA clearance.
Right. Unless you've been to, the 10 banned countries, like if you've been to Iran or whatever.
Well, that's a problem. Okay,
Yeah.
That's a problem. I mean, I had a client sometime in recent memory who was a British citizen, so you'd think no problem, but, he'd been to North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
This sort of stuff, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to get a visa, but it does mean that you're, if I'm understanding correctly, that you're not going to be able to, use the visa waiver ESTA thing, right?
Yeah, something like that, right?
But I mean, my point is this, right? You can see there's a lot of permutations depending on, what your citizenship is, right? But I mean, I think that it's important when people renounce, unless they're Canadian, to proceed on the basis, to consciously say, I no longer have a right to come to the United States, okay?
Yeah.
Now, does that mean I can't? No, but I think it's important that people understand they don't have that right. And, there's a whole list of excludable aliens, for this reason or that reason. And, I have had people who I've advised to not renounce because they have, issues in their past that, could come out of the woodwork, so to speak, right? So, I don't know why we're going on so long about this. We're talking about a small group of people, obviously, but I think the point is an important one. That if you renounce U.S. citizenship, you have no right to enter the United States. Now, having said that, I think that a lot of people attribute far too much significance to that. The same people who haven't visited the United States in a decade are somehow upset about this. If you haven't had any interest in visiting the United States for a decade, I seriously doubt that renouncing U.S. citizenship is going to make it a more attractive place for you to visit. Okay, but that is the reality here.
Yeah, I noticed. I actually just got back from the U.S. 2 days ago, so I was there for the first time in 6 months or something. And I went through, and obviously, I saw the Canadian and U.S. line is a separate line. It doesn't mention Bahamas or Bermuda there, right? So there are a couple other like quirky ones that get visa free to the U.S. Bahamas is like the common example, other than Canada, but it doesn't like Bahamas. I don't think they get to use the same line as Canadians at the airport.
I don't have an answer to that. I don't know. Whether they do or whether they don't. I mean, that's a procedural administrative issue. That has nothing to do with, with their rights under U.S. immigration law.
Mhm.
Is it Bermuda? Is it Bermuda and the
I
Bahamas?
think Bermuda has one, and then Bahamas has one. But I also read. I haven't done too much research in this, but I saw like a comment on Twitter just in the past week or two that said that like it for some of those like Bahamas or Bermuda, it only counts as visa free to the U.S. if you're flying like directly from that country. So if they flew from Europe or something, they don't get the visa free. I'm not sure, something like that.
I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, but I mean, look. Let's be clear on the general point, right? That citizens of those countries are in a better position on renunciation
Hmm.
in terms
For
of
sure.
being able to enter the United States. I mean, if they don't have to go through the ESTA thing,
Yeah.
et cetera. I mean, I don't want to blow this out of proportion, okay? But, you know, we get into stuff like ESTA, and a lot of countries have it. If you've tried to go to the UK recently, for example, right? There are now requirements of, electronic travel authorizations, right? So, I
Mm.
mean, this is not like the US is pioneering this or anything, but, you know, this is it is one more barrier to entry. It's also an area where it's run principally, I would think, by AI and bots and stuff like that, right? Which I think can create problems for certain kinds of people.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess what do you kind of see on the horizon then in terms of the trend definitely seems to be that it's getting harder for everybody in terms of
Harder in what
in
sense?
in terms of like entering the US and actually even entering the UK, entering Europe too. They're introducing the ETIAS
Yeah.
system. So it's like it's getting like visa free is basically going away everywhere. So it's like maybe Canadians have visa free to the US now, but maybe it's not going to be like that 10 years from now.
Um, you're of course correct. I mean, the only thing we can do is talk about what the rules of the law would be at the time we're having the discussion. Um, I would have to think, though, that if it reaches the point that Canadians need a visa to enter the United States, that even fewer of them will want to go there, than do now. I mean, that would be, I think, an extreme escalation in hostility, towards Canadians to get to that point. But look, I mean, let's not kid ourselves here. I mean, you're in to some extent anyway, the second citizenship business, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Citizenships, residencies,
Yeah.
right? I mean, citizenship matters. Okay, and it matters for a lot of different things. Um, it matters for benefits under treaties, all kinds of things, tax treaties, etc. And although U.S. citizenship is a problem, and it's one of the few citizenships in the world that is in many cases worth renouncing, it does have value. I mean, all citizenships have value because they give you generally the right to enter the country.
Yeah.
Although in the case of the United States, because the constitutional rights, whatever they may be, are so old and limited, right? I don't know that it gives you a right to leave. I don't think there's a constitutional right to leave the United States. Um, and there may not even be a constitutional right to enter the United States as a
Right.
U.S. citizen. I mean, that's an interesting question.
Mm.
I mean, I know people assume all these things to be true, but who knows? But look, citizenship matters, and although there are lots of people renouncing U.S. citizenship, I don't think they're doing. I don't think they're doing it by and large for political reasons. They're doing it because they're finding it difficult to survive as U.S. citizens because of the awful regulatory regime.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I mean that's where it is, right?
Hey guys, quick break from the episode to tell you about BitRefill. BitRefill allows you to shop online and in person without banks, converting your crypto directly into merchant balance. We're talking gift cards to Nike, Amazon, Apple, Airbnb, Hotels.com, and many more, all paid for with crypto. BitRefill offers more than 10,000 gift card options in 180 countries all across Latin America, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, El Salvador, and many more. You can also apply the code MyLatinLife at checkout to get 10% back on your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. Yeah, and I think about it a lot because if there was anyone in a good position to renounce, it would be me, right? Because I have Canadian citizenship as well as Italian citizenship, so I already have two first world passports other than the US. So I'm probably in the top tier of people for whom it might actually make sense. If you only have, a St. Kitts passport, probably doesn't make sense for most people. But for me, I probably I don't really have a job anymore, so I'm not dependent on the U.S. job market. But who knows in the future? Maybe you know maybe I don't know. Goldman Sachs wants to hire me or to be a senior advisor or something. But um, so like yeah, it's like if anyone was in a pretty good position to do it, it would be me. But even still, I'm very reprehensive, I guess you'd say.
Oh, well, apprehensive.
Apprehensive.
I think it's the word you want. Well, what I would say to you is that it's not hurting you enough yet. Um,
It probably does. I'm paying taxes. It hurts. Yeah.
well, it's not hurting you
Yeah.
relative to what it could. I mean, we've met personally, so I know you're a relatively young guy. You know, as you go through life, and as you transition to trying to live off investments and things, this is going to become a much bigger problem for you. Um, I don't think. I mean, it is interesting to me, right? Because on the one hand, you're right that if you just look at your citizenship collection
Portfolio. Yeah.
objectively, that's really something, right? I mean, you've got Canadian citizenship, you've got an EU passport, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the Italian, I mean that's incredible. I mean, I think that the EU thing is probably the gold standard in citizenship. At least that's what I think personally. I mean, it doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
But I mean, you recognize, and I think properly so, that, and I think largely because you're in this space or business, that citizenships have value. And I
Yeah.
agree with you that U.S. citizenship has value. But I mean, let me ask you this question. Say it got to the point that because of your U.S. citizenship, you weren't able to meet the basic responsibilities to your family, for financial planning, investing, and generally providing for them. Would that change your mind?
Could you give me an example of how that might manifest itself?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'll just use the basic example that's pretty much used around the world. I mean, let's say that let's say for example you're in Australia, okay, um, and they have this mandatory superannuation thing that everybody has to contribute to, and there are varying views on it, but enough people seem to think that this stuff conflicts with the U.S. tax laws to the extent that people can't benefit from the superannuation program, right, which is the basic retirement program in Australia. So, if you were living in Australia, would you keep U.S. citizenship, believing that it would disable you from the kind of financial planning that it would be expected of you as a citizen and resident of Australia, and frankly expected of you by the rest of your family? Would you keep it then, or would you get rid of it?
I honestly, I kind of don't know what you mean.
Well, okay, so the way the Australian superannuation thing is set up is that they draw their payments from a distributions. They it's basically tax free stuff, right?
The retirement plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but the U.S. wants to tax that.
Right. Sort of like a TFSA in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
Sure.
whatever. Okay.
Yeah. Or yeah.
And the U.S. wants to tax it, but it's tax. Well, yeah. I mean, you just got to expect. I feel as a U.S. citizen abroad that yeah, there's the FEIE and everything, but once your income kind of gets beyond that 100K ish mark, it's like the overage. You're basically paying 30% because as an entrepreneur, you're paying 50% Social Security tax or payroll tax, and then the overage, whatever you're making, you're paying tax on that too. So yeah, it ends up being it's not insignificant, and then capital gains too, and this and that. It's like
Yeah, but you're looking at this from a point of view of some guy who is making enough money, so they probably could afford to be have this excessive tax burden.
Well, you get the foreign tax credits and stuff, right? So.
Well, yeah, but to use a foreign tax credit, you got to be paying tax in the other country.
Right.
So let's say you're being taxed on your Australian superannuation by the United States, where it is possible to plan around this, if you get started early enough and mitigate it to some extent. But the average person's not going to be able to do that, okay? Because even if they try to get help, it's hard to find the kind of help they need. But let's say you're an average middle class person, and your view of the world, and this is mostly true, is that compliance with the U.S. taxation makes it impossible for you to meet your financial planning objectives in the country where you're living permanently.
Mm-hmm.
Would you keep it or not?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Where it's like if paying, I guess you're saying you get a pension and it's whatever 1,500 a month, but and you're barely making ends meet, and if you have to pay tax on that, now you're not making ends meet. That's kind of what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, obviously, the whole point of the U.S. is that you can make more money than you would otherwise, and then when that's no longer the case, it becomes kind of annoying. I was talking to a Swiss guy recently who renounced U.S. citizenship, and he's like, I had to because I can't have anything in Switzerland other than a basic checking account. I'm not allowed to have.
Well, that's right. That's right. I mean, U.S. citizen, it's like a U.S. birthplace, like the Scarlet Letter. It disables you from being able to, do a lot of the things you can do. I mean, let's not kid ourselves, okay? In the 21st century, U.S. citizenship is a disability, okay? I mean, you may not feel it if you live in the United States, but if you try to live outside the United States, it's only a question of degree.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it is. It's like, you're presumably a fan of the James Dale Davidson book, The Sovereign Individual, are you?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I thought so. Well, this is an amazing book. I remember reading it when it came out in '97, before all of this stuff really began. And, he made some very, very interesting points. I mean, the whole purpose of the book, the whole theme of the book, as you know, is sort of moving from the industrial age of the 20th century to the digital age of the 21st century. And his point was, he said, was that U.S. citizenship was a fantastic thing to have in the industrial age, but you couldn't have it in the digital age because of citizenship taxation. I mean, he gave all kinds of examples that turned out to be, extremely prophetic, right? So now, will they recognize this? I don't know. I don't think that the United States generally values its citizens at all. I mean, I think they just see them as, cows to be milked,
Basically,
for
yeah.
cash revenue, etc. So I don't know. But let me give you another example. This is a discussion I had with somebody about 3 weeks ago. So this woman contacted me. She's probably late 50s, in a European country. She was a naturalized U.S. citizen and lived in the United States till she got divorced. And she has two sources of income. She has support payments from her husband.
Mm-hmm.
She expects to have U.S. Social Security soon, so we'll call that a second. But she had an accident, had a serious accident, and as a result is getting some kind of disability payments from the German government. Now, I mean, I saw her tax return, so I sort of see her as somebody who has barely enough money to live, but not a lot of extra money, and she was considering renouncing U.S. citizenship because she couldn't afford the 800 euros or whatever a year to file a U.S. tax return, which was interesting to me. Now, so I looked at her stuff because I was just trying to understand. My thinking was, does she really need to be paying this money, to have somebody fill out a return? I mean, surely this is just a simple thing any moron could do if you just showed them how to do it, right? It was so
Right.
little.
TurboTax.
Well, I started to look at this, and what I realized was that the U.S. sources of income were actually excluded from U.S. taxation under the treaty, right?
Mm.
What the U.S. was taxing was the German disability income, if you can imagine. I'll let that sink in for a minute. All right, so this is what citizenship taxation is. I mean, it varies from country to country because of treaties, but, I found this not only extraordinary, but extraordinarily offensive, where the effect of citizenship taxation is that the U.S. is not taxing, in this particular case, U.S. source income. Is going after this woman's German disability payment.
That's kind of funny.
Well, if you're an academic or a tax accountant, it's funny. If you're living it, it's an incredible problem, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, this system. Now, the bottom line is, I don't know what she's going to do.
Just stop filing.
Stop filing?
Yeah.
Well, I did tell her that she was never going to owe any tax, and there were no information returned. So it's, question is, where's the penalty exposure? But, I'm not her tax preparer accountant. Who knows what that person's telling her? But it was interesting because this is somebody who, in her mind anyway, is being forced out of U.S. citizenship, right? Because of the tax situation.
Okay, so basically the argument is for low-income Americans abroad, the burden's overwhelming because you have to pay to comply, and then maybe they want to tax whatever small income that you have from abroad. So basically you're saying, for lack of a better word, for the brokies, it might make sense to renounce in some way.
Well, yeah, depending on whether they're getting U.S. Social Security.
Right, but if you renounce, you still get U.S. Social Security, right?
Yeah, but it changes. You become a non-resident alien, and the way you're taxed is different.
And then it taxes you like withholding.
Well, I mean, if you are, so if you're a U.S. citizen, right? I mean, it's taxed in a certain way. It's taxed more punitively. if you're a non-resident alien. I mean, here's another interesting situation, right? I've seen this a few times. And, I mean, this stuff is really bad, right? I mean, this was somebody in, I can't remember, Australia, New Zealand. I think they have similar treaties. But the way these treaties are written is that the U.S. retains taxing rights over Social Security.
Uh-huh.
So you
Yeah,
get
that
your
seems
Social
fair.
Security, but because the U.S. retains the taxing rights coupled with your shift in status from citizen to non-resident alien, I mean, what it can mean is that you lose a quarter of the Social Security payments
Right.
by ending your, renouncing or whatever.
And you still have the filing requirement in the US, I guess, right? Or no?
Well, you're not going to have a filing requirement if if you can arrange it so that there's proper withholding.
Okay.
But the point here is that, I mean, to keep it real simple, right? In the case of this person or persons, I mean, I've seen this, more than once. Um, they're keeping, see, if they renounce U.S. citizenship, all of a sudden their Social Security, if they're really dependent on it, is taxed much more punitively, right? So in those cases, they wouldn't want to renounce. I mean, look, it is unfortunate that um, people will not get the advice they need before they do these things, all right?
Mm.
And then, you just can't unwind it. But if there were a theme here, I hadn't quite thought of it this way. But I think this started off by my saying, well, Vance, you're a young entrepreneur and you're going to have enough money to pay the extra tax if you want. So I think the theme here is that it's really the middle class and the lower middle class who are being destroyed by this.
Really? So you don't think, yeah, I guess that's the question is like, who do you think it affects the most? Uh, Renunciation. Do you think it affects the high net worth individuals because they have to pay exit tax typically, or do you think it affects the middle class the most? Maybe you could argue it affects them the least, or we've talked about the low income and how it kind of affects them, but
I think
actually,
it affects, okay, who it affects mostly. I think first you look at, what does their financial situation look like, and then you look at where they are. Are they lower middle class, impoverished, very wealthy, whatever. But first of all, the problem is mostly for most people the non-U.S. source income and assets. All right, because the U.S. I mean, look, let's not kid ourselves here, okay? This is absolutely true that the U.S. imposes a far more punitive tax system on Americans abroad, because by that I mean, people who have non-U.S. assets
mm-hmm,
as a financial center of gravity outside the United States. Now,
mm-hmm,
why is this? Well, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons, but one of the reasons is that when it comes to non-U.S. pensions or mutual funds, things like that, the U.S. just doesn't tax them in the way it taxes U.S. equivalents, right? So you've got that problem. U.S. citizenship is a clear, I wouldn't say barrier, but added problem in participating in tax-favored retirement planning vehicles in other country, right? Whether it's a superannuation in Canada, or whether it's in Australia, or a TFSA in Canada. Now, I'm not saying that these things can't be partially mitigated, but it requires the right kind of advisor and being able to find the right kind of advisor, catch this stuff early enough. So that's the first. So it's mainly, long-term Americans abroad, right? Then of that group, who does it affect most? Well, it affects the ones most where, to comply, it's where the effect of U.S. citizenship taxation. And, I think there are three components to it, right? First, there's the actual punitive taxation. Second, there's what I would call the opportunity cost, right? Of not being able to benefit from the types of retirement planning that are available to your neighbors, right? or being able to run small business corporations. There's a group, I think is significantly impacted by this. But a third would be being kept out of investment opportunities because of your U.S. citizenship. Who wants a U.S. citizen partner if that invites the IRS in? And the fourth, and this is something that I think needs to be developed a lot more, and I realized this in a discussion I had with somebody last week, it's the pure psychic cost. I was talking to this guy, I was thinking about renunciation, and he's, I don't know, I don't know what he is, maybe he's 50 or something, and and he's been in Canada for like 15. I mean, he's no doubt he's American, right? So there's a huge identity thing, right? But we were talking about all this, and then I said to him, well, and here's where I'm going with this. Like, one additional factor is, do you realize how much time you spend thinking about this, right? I mean, how are you going to compete against other people if 20% of your time is thinking about U.S. taxation and stuff like that, and all of their time is spent, trying to run their businesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a huge, what I would call, excess baggage cost here as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Those are the people who are mostly affected by it. I do not see the really wealthy as being overly affected by it, for a number of reasons. One, very wealthy people tend to have a reasonable percentage of their assets in the U.S. anyway. U.S. securities, etc. Mm-hmm. They're not dependent. They are not dependent on things like TFSAs or RRSPs, right? They have their own stuff. They tend to not have pension plans, right? I mean, most of their wealth is, sort of self-generated, right? Mm-hmm. And although U.S. citizenship it's always an inconvenience if you're not living in the United States. I mean, there's no country in the world that, has a red carpet for U.S. citizens. We're going to give you special benefits.
I think Albania or something. But
I mean, that's not happening. But those are the people who I don't think this is a problem for. I mean, a good friend of mine is a longtime business associate of somebody whose name you would know, who is an American citizen who has, a real lot of money. Okay. And, is well known to have a real lot of money.
Kevin O'Leary.
Kevin O'Leary, come on. No, I'm talking real money. Okay. Well, I don't know anything about Kevin O'Leary, but, whatever. Anyway, real money, regardless of who it is, right? And, I once asked her if this guy had ever considered renunciation. And, she said was that, no, that he just wasn't interested in it, not a problem for him. Okay, precisely because, once you're outside the ambit of normal, the types of retirement planning vehicles that most people use, tax deferred government programs or tax benefits from small business corporations, etc. I don't think that U.S. citizenship is that big of a problem. So what it really
it's like mobility. Once you're rich, like mobility is more important than saving money on taxes.
Well, it's not clear to me they would save money on taxes necessarily. I mean, where the super rich would renounce would be what I suspect would have been the Tina Turner situation. Okay. So, I mean, I don't know any more about Tina Turner.
What she do? She moved to Switzerland or something?
Well, yeah. I mean, she remarried. Her husband was Swiss, and she lived in Switzerland for the last part of her life. But I mean, I think we can safely say that she had quite a bit of money, right? Uh-huh. Now, why would she have renounced? Well, and this is why I think a lot of very wealthy people might consider renunciation, is because paying the exit tax on renunciation can be a lot less than paying the estate tax on death. Unless you're trying to plan around the estate tax, right? But anyway, no, I mean, she was in Switzerland, and I I presume that she had the best advice money could buy.
So what happened there?
Nothing. She renounced and then eventually died. I mean, this is one of the things that people need to realize: they will die. Okay, so I mean, I wouldn't blow this stuff out of proportion. You're going to die regardless. Okay, So I mean, maybe another way of looking at it, and this is another way of looking at it. I actually think that um, I'm seeing more and more of this. Okay, where people die, and then all of a sudden the executors get involved, and they find out, oh my God, somebody had a green card or somebody was a U.S. citizen. They haven't been filing taxes, which there's a lot of that out there, and then the estate people will decide to bring them into compliance through streamline. And I mean, it can become a real nightmare. Anyway, bottom line is this: that I think that renunciation of U.S. citizenship, I think, can be a very important and legitimate part of estate planning. Because if you're no longer a U.S. citizen when you die, you don't have to worry about that aspect of it.
The like wealth tax or inheritance tax.
Well, depending on what your asset composition is, okay. I mean, it can cut both. It can cut both ways, right? What I'm saying is that renunciation can be an important part of estate planning, not that you should go through with it necessarily.
Uh-huh.
Because remember that that if you renounce, you're no longer domiciled in the U.S. If you had, say, a small apartment building worth $100 million, and that's a U.S. cited asset, and you die, they're going to want $40 million
The
in the
U.S.
form of
is.
an estate tax, right?
The U.S. wants estate
Yeah,
tax,
yeah,
even for on non-citizens.
yeah. Because a lot of it's based on on U.S. cited assets, right?
Huh? I didn't know that.
So I mean, a U.S. citizen, to give you a sense of the difference, right? I think after this recent law goes through, I think that the estate tax threshold for U.S. citizens, I think it's something like 15 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
30 million for a married couple.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I don't know, that's not what it used to be, okay, but it does shield,
Okay. So
somebody on
if
death
you have
from a
like
lot.
physical U.S. assets, that's definitely something to think about as well. Hey, could I ask you about, I guess, U.S. citizens with non-U.S. citizen spouses? Because they're also in a very interesting situation, right? Because on one hand, they might not need to renounce because the non-U.S. citizen spouse has no U.S. tax obligations. And so what a lot of people do is they'll run the money through the spouse, in like a legally compliant way. And then the family has no U.S. tax obligations anyway, and then so maybe they don't need to renounce. Obviously that gets complicated fast, I'm sure. Or maybe there's probably pros and cons on both sides of that. What do you kind of see for the families with non-U.S. citizen spouses?
Well, um, sometimes I see huge conflict. Okay, first of all, over this issue, and that's a problem. All right. But what I see a lot of is that the family home is in the name of the non-U.S. citizen because of the taxation of the capital gain, right? Under U.S. law. So, I mean, what you would do in a situation like that would be, say you have two pieces of real estate. One is your family home, the other is an investment property. You'd want the investment property in the name of the U.S. citizen, the family home in the name of the spouse, the non-resident alien spouse, right? Because the capital gain on the investment property is going to be taxable regardless, right? So, yeah, there's no question that the and then there are other areas where it can be extremely helpful to you, right? Is in structuring small business corporations, okay, where 50% of the ownership is owned by the non-resident alien spouse.
And then it's like the business is like half tax free, sort of.
Well, it's not that the business is tax free. It's that it's not a controlled foreign corporation for the purposes of the
Hmm.
the subpart F and what used to be called the guilty rules, etc.
Hmm.
So I mean that's to have a non-U.S. citizen spouse, an alien spouse, right? Um, I mean, it's a circumstance. I don't think I'd marry somebody because of their lack of U.S. citizenship status necessarily. But, that is a circumstance that, if you're,
Uh-huh.
in a marriage where you trust each other, right, where, that can be used to essentially avoid U.S. taxation
Hmm.
on
And so,
certain things.
and so you would maybe argue that U.S. citizens with a non-U.S. spouse have less necessity to renounce because they have other options available to them.
Um, I don't know. I think this so depends on what people are actually doing. It is most certainly a factor. Okay, it is most certainly a factor. Um, I mean, it's not. By the way, when we go back to the business thing, I mean, you still have to file 5471s and stuff. Okay, so it's not a clean break, and it's never quite as simple as all this. But let me tell you where I see a tremendous incentive to renounce. Okay, and I see this all the time, and it's this that there's the decision to renounce, and then there's the decision of when to renounce. How long can you keep U.S. citizenship? Now, in our past podcasts, we have talked about the dual citizenship from birth exemption to the exit tax, right? Before that, if somebody's a dual citizen from birth,
Right.
you know,
If you were born
assuming
abroad
they,
as a
assuming
U.S.
they met other requirements,
Uh-huh.
they can have $1 billion of net worth and not be a covered expatriate. But the
Uh-huh.
problem is this. Let's go back to your scenario of sort of a 50s style nuclear family. We have one spouse is a U.S. citizen, one spouse is an alien.
Hmm.
We have two children who are U.S. citizens, born outside the United States, say.
Okay.
Now, and they're thinking about renunciation. So, one of the problems with renunciation is the great trial lawyer Mo Levine used to end his jury addresses with, "It's not what you take from them, it's what you leave them with." Okay, think about that. It's not what you take from them, it's what you leave them with. So it's not losing U.S. citizenship is necessarily the problem. It's what the effect of losing U.S. citizenship might be. So let's say you renounce and you're not a dual citizen from birth and your net worth is over $2 million, making you a covered expatriate. You have U.S. citizen children, right? So the covered gift rules would essentially say that if you were to make gifts or bequests of any amount to those U.S. citizen children, if you're a covered expatriate, then those gifts will be subject to a 40% clawback. So now let's put some numbers on this thing, right? So let's say 2.5 million net worth when they renounce, covered expatriate. 30 years later, $100 million, two U.S. citizen kids. Maybe they're living in the United States, maybe they're not. It's common to leave your estate to your kids. They get $100 million when the former U.S. citizen dies, but because he was a covered expatriate, the IRS will take 40% of that. Now, this is, I think, by far the bigger problem with covered expatriate status for normal people. So what does that mean? This is a tremendous incentive to both renounce. Well, it's a tremendous incentive if you're going to renounce sooner before you hit the 2 million thing so that you're not a covered expatriate, right? See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a huge problem for people. And I think it should incentivize a lot of people to renounce, I think probably as quickly as they can, given inflation and that. Because otherwise they're going to lose the option to renounce without being a covered expatriate. Now, yeah, of course the kids can get out of it if they want to renounce U.S. citizenship too. And that's why there is such a thing as the family renunciation. I mean, as I've said a million times, a family that renounces together bonds together. Well, this is a huge problem, and these are, I mean, even when the IRS, this is under Section 2801 of the Internal Revenue Code, when they published the final regulations on this this year, they even acknowledged the unfairness of this, not in quite that language, but the craziness of this rule. But, they don't make the laws, they just apply them. So, bottom line, what does that mean? Okay, it means that if you're not born a dual citizen and you're not meeting the requirements that could exempt you from covered expatriate status, and you're not planning on moving back to the United States, you have U.S. citizen children, and your net worth is below $2 million, I think you need to have a conversation with yourself, okay, about, the whole renunciation issue.
Mm-hmm.
That's a person that I think, no matter how you look at it, I mean, there are clear benefits to renunciation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But against that, you've got to look at what the assets are that are owned in the United States. I mean, it's not, there are a number of different factors, that sort of play off each other.
Yeah.
But the one thing that is a constant is that U.S. citizenship is a clear problem if you're not living in the United States.
Yeah.
And a lot of people may want to consider renouncing before a lot of these problems become actually triggered, right? It's like a dormant virus in your system. You go along and one day, or here's another problem that I see all the time. I know it's hard for you to believe this, but people do die at some point. Okay? But you've got somebody, a U.S. citizen, not a covered expatriate, the non-U.S. citizens below the 2 million, the non-U.S. citizen spouse has assets, they die, U.S. citizen spouse inherits, boom, they're a covered expatriate, making life 1,000 times harder.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, these are reasons to, I wouldn't go so far as to say that I think people should or should not renounce. That's a very personal kind of decision. But I would say that to ignore these issues is foolishness in the extreme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all very good points. Yeah, and things change, right? Like, I guess for me, I could even, as a Canadian, have, a property in Cape Cod or something like that and
No
go visit
problem.
it.
No problem owning property in the U.S., but I would not do it.
No?
I would not do it. This is my personal opinion, and I acknowledge that, but I wouldn't do it because of, we've got the problem if you own it directly of estate tax exposure, because remember, the threshold is only $60,000.
Wow.
Yes, there's a provision in the Canada-U.S. tax treaty and other treaties, although there aren't a lot of them that mitigate this, but that's a general problem. But you've also then got the problem of probate, that can be very, very expensive. And then, then a lawyer will say, well, So we have a workaround. Let's have the house in Cape Cod owned by a corporation or a trust, and
Uh
all you're doing is inviting lawyers into your life.
huh.
I mean, do you really need this?
So whether you own it through a corporate shell or you own it directly, either way, it's going to be paying.
Look, there's a huge bureaucratic and psychic cost of dealing with the United States. Okay, I'm not saying that there aren't psychic costs dealing with other countries as well. But, because of the tax and regulatory regime, I mean, remember that the U.S. not only has an income tax regime, it has an estate and gift tax regime, right? I mean, it has all kinds of extraterritorial banking regulation, FBAR, FATCA, stuff like that.
Yep.
I mean, this is regulation in the extreme. I mean, I do not understand, to be brutally honest here, how every 4th of July, Americans can run around imagining that they're freer than the people in other countries. I mean, if anything, I think they're probably less free, than citizens of.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. It's just insane how much like data they're collecting on us and spying on us and everything. And I'm like, well, at least if I renounce, I'm not getting spied on like 24/7, or at least hopefully not.
Well, that may or may not be true, but I mean, you're calling attention to. I think that the point is this. I mean, obviously, I think that's a terrible thing, but from a practical point of view, what this means is that you can pretty much assume that everything you do and you own is going to be, I wouldn't go so far as saying the public domain, but I would say accessible to governments by pushing a button, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And, so that means, I think compliance with all of these rules. And so the question is not, to go back to your example of a house in Cape Cod, the question is not, would I like to have a house in Cape Cod? Well, who wouldn't? The question is, am I prepared to deal with bureaucracy and problems of owning a house in Cape Cod, right? As a non-citizen of the United States, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's no end of people who will sell you, will put together some kind of a blocker entity for you, corporation, say we're going to solve these things, right? But, these are administrative costs, etc. And I don't, and I think that, if you want freedom, I think that along with freedom generally goes simplicity.
True.
So if you want the house in Cape Cod, I mean, is it really that you want to own the house, or is that you want to be able to access a house in Cape Cod? Probably the latter, right? So why don't you get the benefits by using somebody else's house in Cape Cod, by paying some money,
Yeah.
and avoid, all this other stuff, right?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, that's the trade off of home ownership in general. Even forget all this crazy tax stuff. But it's true. I think I'm kind of holding out that like maybe I think maybe I would want to live in the U.S. at some point in the future, maybe, or at least I wouldn't rule it out. I was there a couple days ago. It was nice, and if a company wanted to, make me a CEO on a $10 million a year salary or something, I'd be like, all right, let's give her a
Well,
go.
I don't perceive you as in a position where you have to make any, immediate kind of decision. Now, I
True.
think I'm right in saying you're a dual citizen from birth, anyway, right?
I was born in Canada.
Okay, so you're a dual citizen from birth. I mean,
Yeah.
You'd have to live there, to be able to get the benefits of the dual citizenship from birth exemption. But I mean, it is possible, right? I mean, you have certain benefits that are not available to, people born in, who are just, only U.S. citizens. I mean,
Yeah.
what they've done is they've created sort of a caste system of citizenship, right?
Hmm.
where the dual citizens from birth are sort of the Brahmins. I mean, you're a preferred citizen. You're the best kind of citizen
Yeah,
in the
people
United
don't
States.
realize this. That we talked about this in the previous
Yeah.
podcast. If people missed it, but basically that there's almost like two classes of U.S. citizens, and the ones born abroad actually have a bunch of advantages over the Americans born in the U.S.
Well, yeah, because they're to the extent they're dual citizens from birth, right? I
Yeah.
mean, the ones that the U.S. system hates the most would be the daughters of the American Revolution type, the ones who trace their lineage right back. I mean, God, you know, I mean, these tax rules just are so brutal on them. But this is what we've been talking about are, I think, largely the consequences of citizenship taxation. And notice that citizenship taxation opens the door to citizenship non-taxation, right?
Mm.
Dual citizen from birth, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of factors at play here. But what I do think is this, okay? I think that, younger people generally starting out life, I think, okay, U.S. citizenship, if we just look at it as an asset, right?
Hmm.
Okay. It's an asset, it's a depreciating asset, right?
Mm.
So it
Like it's
has,
more valuable in your working years.
yes,
Yeah.
or when you, not so much working, I'd put it a little differently. When you're out there trying to create a career,
Uh huh.
okay? Because, I mean, look, there's plenty of job opportunities, in the United States, et cetera. So it
Yep.
does have value, and it has value, I think, for, people who, educational opportunities, perhaps, this sort of stuff. I mean,
Yep.
it does have value, but and it's not particularly costly to people at that point, right? Because their lives are focused on developing careers and things like that, and so this goes on to
Right. More earned
probably
income
into their
than
30s or
capital
until they
gains.
until they become a licensed professional somewhere that ties them to that area, right?
Mm.
But so, I mean, I think they probably should try to ride this out and see whether there will be any changes in the laws. But people 50 plus, I I think it would be very irresponsible for them to not consider renunciation if they can.
Mm.
Meaning they have another citizenship or whatever.
Okay. Okay. So some takeaways. If you're young, you still got time. If you're born outside the U.S., you still got time. If you're born in the U.S., you're a covered expatriate. There's that $2 million threshold for the exit tax, and once you start approaching that $2 million net worth threshold, that's when you really want to start thinking about if you want to kind of pull the trigger before you hit that threshold.
Well, yeah, because I mean, part of this, right? And it's interesting to me that this doesn't generally emerge in a conversation about this unless I raise it specifically, right? Is the problem of being a covered expatriate and the covered gifts rules, right? Not being able to leave assets to U.S. citizen children in
Hmm.
that, without a 40%, confiscation on this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, U.S. citizenship is a serious problem in the 21st century, okay? It really is. It's a disability. Okay, I mean, you can say, well, this isn't triggered if you don't leave the United States, but
Hmm.
you know, in the 21st century, this is an unprecedented era of global mobility. People want to be able to leave, etc. And really, what citizenship taxation is a collection of laws that that create severe obstacles to people being able to live outside the United States. Okay,
Hmm.
and it's not really any different from, and then you add these exit taxes. I mean, how is this different from, in the 70s, the Soviets weren't letting people leave, having them pay back, having to
Mm.
pay an immigration tax. Well, at least that was based on a perception that they were paying back the state for their education. I mean, the U.S. is applying this to people who've never even lived in the United States, right?
No.
And if anything, the Soviet exit taxes were far more morally defensible than what the U.S. is doing.
I mean,
And there's
that's got to be a university paper or something. I don't know about that. Anything about
well, think about it for a minute. Okay, I know it's hard, for people to process the concept, right?
Yeah,
But
it's definitely.
when you look at the exit tax rules, there's how they apply to people who lived all their lives in the U.S. and are about to leave, and that can be passed off as well. You were living in the United States, so we're going to tax you on the unrealized gains up to that point. But they apply the rules even more punitively to American citizens who've never lived in the United States,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Or
just great. They got to make an exemption or something for that. If you've literally never lived in the U.S., they got to. I mean, I feel like it's just a simple exemption, and it would like change the whole game.
well, look how hard it has been, to get this done. I mean, you're presumably aware of the 2024 LaHood bill. We had the 2018 Holding bill.
Yeah,
We
yeah. I
had
was
the
gonna. We got to
Republicans
wrap up soon.
oversee.
I know we're over time, and also my computer's gonna die. But real quick, why don't you tell people about the work that you've been doing with there's the Republicans abroad, and there's a couple different organizations, right? And there's been some movement recently in the past 6 months.
Well, I don't know. There's been movement in the last 6 months, but there has consistently, since about 2014, been efforts, from a number of different groups to try to get these things changed.
Mhm.
I mean, I think Republicans overseas has worked on this various
Yeah,
ways since
and
2000.
Trump said he was gonna like fix things, but he hasn't done it yet.
Well, he hasn't done it. I think the operative word is yet. Okay, there was never any statement that was going to be in the big beautiful bill, et cetera,
Big
right?
beautiful bill.
And in a
Yeah,
lot of ways, I'm glad it wasn't because everything in that got so contentious that I think the last thing you want is that to be.
are you you know Brandon Mitchner from Tax Fairness for Americans Abroad?
I know of him. I met him once virtually.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. We have a podcast with him as well. People can check out its episode 212, which is another good one. I believe he's French or living in France, and he's been working a lot on the lobbying side of things to get
Yeah,
some of
yeah.
these.
He's the head of the tax fairness
For
for America.
Americans
Is it
abroad.
TFFAA or something? Tax fairness for
Yeah,
anyway.
good guy.
They were
Good guy.
they're
What a
working
legend.
for
I
the
mean,
holding.
we
Yeah,
definitely need
sorry,
people.
the LaHood bill.
How funny would it be if you renounce because all these rules, and then they just switch the rules and they say, oh yeah, now we're going to residency based taxation or whatever. They make the rules a little bit better, and then you're like, what? I just renounced shit, and then you start regretting
I think that's fine. I
it.
think honestly, I think that so much of this U.S. citizenship thing is just habitual. It's largely an identity thing. I mean, people don't want to renounce having visited the United States in 25 years, yet they want their U.S. citizenship. I mean, at some point, these options become ridiculously expensive.
I know it'd be funny, like the covered expat thing's 2 million today. What if they raise it to 10 million, and then the guy renounced, and he's like, "Damn it, they just raised it. I could have, waited until my net worth got higher or something." So it's
You know,
like a game theory.
here's the thing, right? And so what? They think they made a mistake? No, they did not make a mistake. Okay, look, in life, you make first of all, what is a decision? A decision, if it were certain, you wouldn't have to make a decision. Decision means that you're trying to decide what to do with uncertainty either way, right?
Right.
So, what certainty means in this context, right, is that you say, I'd rather live with this set of consequences or that set of consequences. And so, you've done a reasonable job and you've listened to this podcast, and you've decided, well, I don't want to live with the disability of U.S. citizenship anymore. And then they change it. Doesn't mean you made a mistake. You made the right decision with the information you had. So they change it. You still haven't been to the United States in 25 years, so what difference does it make?
Oops, sorry. Did you hear that? Something, my Spotify randomly went off. I'm not sure if you guys heard that. No, yeah, it's yeah. You can only deal with the information on the ground. Some people were suggesting in the comments, the U.S. is going to lead the AI race, and that might also change the dynamic of renouncing as well as the U.S. Maintains leadership in AI. So who knows? But so much to consider. It really is very different, as you mentioned, based on everybody's asset makeup and so many different factors.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But what is an indisputable fact is that U.S. citizenship is a disability in the 21st century.
It's a good line. That's a good line.
Well, but it's absolutely accurate. I mean, if you want to stay in the United States, you'll never realize these situations even exist, right? But I mean, you've seen those electric dog fences, the people put up to keep the dog in the yard. If it tries to leave, they get a shock.
Sure.
Yeah, well, that's what citizenship taxation is.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
That's what exit tax is in general, even if it's residency-based taxation, right? The Canadian exit tax and stuff.
But this is far worse, right? I mean, I agree with you that exit tax are a problem, but you don't lose your citizenship, right? You can leave Canada paying exit tax and come back.
Yeah.
Not the case for the United States.
This is true. All right, so we got to get to wrapping up here. By the way, I think that bagel house on Yonge Street, it's not there anymore.
When were you last there? I don't know. There's been construction there. The only time I was ever in there, well, not the only time. Last time I was in there was with you, I think.
I think it's gone. I think
Really?
I think that whole block.
There's a lot of redevelopment there.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. If it's not gone, it will be gone.
Buddy. Cool. Well, let's get to wrapping up. John, I guess take this time. Any final message you'd like to share with the audience, where they can find you, promote some of your stuff, your Twitter account?
Well, you can find me at citizenshipsolutions.ca or taxresidentabroad.com. If you're on X, I'm expatriation law. And most importantly, I'm on your podcast at MyLatinLife.
Absolutely. People can go check out the back catalog of episodes. Just search John Richardson and it should come right up. Cool. Well, John, thanks again for doing this. Always a pleasure to catch up with you. And thank you for all the information you shared today.
All right. Speak soon.
Absolutely. So this has been another episode of the MyLatinLife podcast. Again, our guest today, John Richardson from Expatriation Law. Did I say that right?
Sounds good.
Cool. And guys, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, really helps us grow the show. And we'll see you in the next episode. Ciao for now.